Hi everybody, thanks for joining us today, whatever time zone you're on, morning, afternoon or evening. We do appreciate you joining us today. We'll just let everybody connect. Talking about connection, just as you're all aware, we are all spread around the globe, so any technical problems or issues with connections, either that we have or that you have at your end, just bear with us, because these things unfortunately are rather unavoidable at times, but hopefully everything will run smoothly. Okay, so thanks for joining us for the second part of this webinar on the rapidly changing composition of the world's drug supply and its effects on high risk for COVID-19. Thom brought us the first part last week. It was very interesting. We had a great discussion at the end with people giving feedback. So please, if you have questions, pop them in the question box, and we're going to leave some time at the end to go over those. And I'm going to let Thom jump straight in with kicking off our webinar. And thanks very much to Thom for being our speaker, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Over to you, Thom.
Thank you, Joanna. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody back for part 2 of this webinar. What I'm going to do, I'm going to briefly answer some questions I didn't get to answer from part 1 last week. Then I'll do a quick recap of what I discussed last week, and then we'll get into the rest of the presentation for today. Some of the questions that we had last week from the webinar, one was, are there any studies done in South Asia on adulterants to changing drug combinations? And I haven't seen any studies that have been published from the South Asia region on this. The only one that I've seen or any indication of it was the UN World Drug Report in 2009 that listed cutting agents in Afghanistan, heroin, and that heroin is distributed throughout, Southwest Asia, the Central Asian states. That's the only place that I've seen that. They wanted to know what are the best resources to learn about this subject. Right now, the best resources to find, there aren't many publications on it, but is to do a Google search, drugs plus cutting agents or drugs plus adulterants, and you'll see a number of studies that have been done worldwide on the issue that'll describe the health problems caused by new cutting agents added to heroin and cocaine principally. Another thing that we're going to do with the Colombo plan, we're going to be developing a special document, which I'll get into later, which will be a guidebook on adulterants, which will provide all the information on the adulterants, the effects they have on drugs, the effects they have on health. So we'll be working on that and distributing that not only to the membership of the ISUP, but also to the international public health community. Basically, another one was, you have any tips on how to communicate these dangers to policymakers? The Colombo plan, we will be developing special public health alerts on the health risk that these adulterants and new cutting agents have, and we'll be getting them out to our member countries, to the ISUP board, to the public health community, and I'll be getting into those later at the end of the presentation. Another one was, they asked if, in my opinion, the opioid overdose, the stimulant overdose crisis in the U.S., is it related to any of these adulterants? And the answer is yes. Earlier in this year, in 2020, the Colombo plan with the Chief Medical Officer at Department of Health and Human Services in the U.S. published an article in the Surgeon General's Public Health Reports on the connection between adulterants and the opioid and the stimulant epidemic, the role that the adulterants play in addition to synthetic opioids like fentanyl that are causing the overdose. So we've seen from the presentation last week, some of our drugs in the US and worldwide can contain up to 14 to 15 cutting agents, many of them being toxic. And those will result, we know, in near and long-term chronic health problems, but also in death. They could result in death if there's too many adulterants in there. I'm going to basically do a quick recap from last week. We were talking about the risk that people with substance use disorders have to COVID-19. And as we discussed last week, people with it have numerous co-occurring health problems that make them more susceptible to COVID-19. And the 4 major ones are respiratory, pulmonary, and cardiovascular diseases or compromises to that system, in addition to suppression of the immune system. Okay, heavy users of substance use basically have risk for respiratory, pulmonary, and cardiovascular diseases and immune system compromise that will put them at risk for COVID-19. And a number of reports have been put out recently by, I said last week, by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the European Drugs Monitoring Center, and other leading researchers worldwide on how drug users are susceptible to COVID-19. And to get into that briefly, like we discussed last week, the toxic effects of cocaine are well documented, which are due to adverse effects on the cardiovascular system. That's to the heart, and damage to the cardiovascular system puts people at risk for COVID-19. People who smoke crack cocaine are especially really susceptible to COVID-19 because it's a highly addictive form of using cocaine. People we discussed last week can smoke crack rocks anytime, 15, 30, 40 times a day, 7 days a week, doing severe damage to their lungs. And prolonged crack cocaine use results in lung damage and pulmonary conditions, including severe respiratory problems. And compromising the respiratory system and the pulmonary system makes a person more susceptible to COVID-19. We discussed last week methamphetamine users are vulnerable to COVID-19 to the drug's effects on the respiratory and pulmonary system. Meth causes pulmonary damage or lung damage, chronic disease of the heart muscle, so that's both damage to the cardiovascular system and the pulmonary system. That'll put meth users at risk for COVID-19. Users of heroin and opioids. Opioids are well known to include respiratory depression and to have an effect on the respiratory system. They also have been reported to affect the immune system, so compromising both the respiratory and immune system, putting users at risk for COVID-19. And one of the important points we made last week that the slowed breathing due to opioid use can result in low concentrations of oxygen in the blood called hypoxemia. And this is important because low concentrations of oxygen in the blood can lead to complications of the pulmonary and cardiac system, and that's the heart and the lung, and that'll put a person at risk for COVID-19. And a number of the adulterants or cutting agents that we'll speak about today, in addition to the drugs, will put a user at risk for COVID-19 and other such viruses and infections because of the effects that they have on the human system, which we'll be getting into. As we discussed last week, illicit drugs are really pure. When a person purchases heroin, meth, or cocaine, it is basically not pure. It is cut with a number of cutting agents or adulterants. Usually there are two types of cutting agents: diluents, that are inert substances that do not have an effect on the user, they just add bulk. These are inert sugars like mannitol and lactose. The other adulterants are pharmacologically active ingredients added to give bulk, to complement or enhance the effect, or produce synergistic effects, basically to make the drug more potent. Last week, we discussed a number of adulterants that worldwide that were causing severe and chronic near and long-term health problems. And that a lot of that was in Latin America, which we had first discovered this in 2010. And basically, we discussed the three main adulterants, new adulterants we have seen worldwide: phenacetin, which is a banned analgesic, and aspirin that depletes red blood cells, damages kidneys, and causes bladder cancer, and a veterinary product, a veterinary dewormer, levamisole, which in humans depletes white blood cells, compromising the immune system, the body's ability to fight off infections. And the same with aminopyrine, another banned analgesic that was removed from aspirin because it depletes white blood cells. Basically, the adulterants, I'll go through these really quick. You'll have a copy of this PowerPoint to go through. The major adulterants we addressed last week with health consequences. We've discussed phenacetin, which depletes red blood cells and does kidney damage; levamisole, the vet dewormer that reduces white blood cells; the banned analgesic aminopyrine depletes white blood cells; the high blood pressure medication diltiazem that causes a double depressant effect with heroin that can cause overdose; acetaminophen, which is used for pain and fever, but it can cause liver damage, and it dramatically decreases breathing when combined with heroin. And if you combine acetaminophen with cocaine, we'll get into later, it can increase the chances of liver damage. Diphenhydramine, the antihistamine, which causes life-threatening cardiac arrhythmia, which is at its irregular heartbeat, and also dramatically depresses breathing when combined with heroin. Another pain reliever, fever reducer, metamizole, that reduces white blood cells. An antipsychotic, quintipian, that we found in heroin, that will produce cardiac arrest and respiratory failure when combined with heroin. The antimalarial quinine, which causes cardiovascular toxicity to the heart and can reduce red blood cells. The stimulant caffeine, which causes respiratory distress with heroin and could cause cardiac injury when combined with cocaine. Lidocaine, which causes irregular heartbeat and respiratory depression when combined with heroin. Benzocaine and procaine, the local anesthetics. Benzocaine will reduce oxygen levels in the blood. Procaine will do damage to the cardiovascular system with irregular heartbeat. Tramadol, which is an opioid pain med, we found it cut with heroin in the US. Tramadol is also used on the African continent and cut with heroin there. That will cause respiratory distress when combined with other substances such as heroin. Xylosine, another vet anesthetic that causes respiratory depression combined with heroin. Muscle relaxant carisoprodol causes respiratory depression with heroin, and the benzodiazepine alprazolam with opioids and alcohol, it could cause respiratory depression, coma, and death. Okay, as we discussed last week, we could give an example on how toxic the adulterants can be. When an adulterant, phenacetin, when that was in aspirin and the night and fever, but over time was found out that it resulted in severe problems to people who took aspirin, such as kidney failure, bladder cancer, and reduced blood cells, and was eventually banned. But back in the 60s, we didn't use aspirin every day, and we just used it for fever or for arthritis. But if we fast forward to today, where you have phenacetin and crack cocaine, crack, like cocaine, is an illicit drug. It's an addictive vehicle. Aspirin is not addictive. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine are addictive. When these adulterants are in an addictive vehicle, such as methamphetamine, heroin, and crack, they are used more, so the user is exposed more to these toxic substances. Where crack, used 15 times a day, 7 days a week over 6 months, we see the toxic health effects appear within months versus years. We discussed last year that in the U.S. and other countries overseas, a typical drug sample can contain multiple drugs, which are in black here, multiple adulterants or cutting agents, which are red, and impurities from the heroin manufacturing process, if it's a heroin sample, in green. And these impurities we discussed last week also could contribute to health problems. And so you mix all these together, they can cause overdose, either fatal or non-fatal. They can make a person susceptible to COVID-19 because of the various damage to the pulmonary, cardiovascular, respiratory, and immune systems. And they can also result in mid and long-term chronic health problems. Okay, one thing that we do know, we said that with the adulterants and a drug, we do know one drug and one adulterant. We do know acetaminophen mixed with heroin can not only damage the liver, but it could cause overdose because of the combined effect, the synergistic effect acetaminophen has with heroin. We know that levamisole put in cocaine, levamisole will deplete white blood cells and compromise the immune system. But what we don't know is what are the combined effects of multiple drugs, multiple adulterants, and multiple impurities in the drug sample. We know if one drug and one adulterant is toxic, multiple drugs, adulterants, and impurities will definitely be very toxic. But what we do know by looking at the pharmacological properties of some of these components of some of these cutting agents and various drugs is that a lot of them come into two categories: stimulants and depressants. And when you mix the stimulant and the depressants, such as cocaine and heroin, you get a speedball. And speedballs, we discussed last week, can put the heart under intense pressure and could cause death. Okay, and we see some of the drug samples we have worldwide, they're basically, we call these super speedball. There's multiple stimulants like methamphetamine and cocaine, and multiple depressants, heroin, and then 4 impurities from the heroin manufacturing process. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into the individual cutting agents or adulterants in drugs that will make a person susceptible to COVID-19. We last week, the individual drugs, heroin, meth, cocaine, cannabis, and fentanyl, the aspects of those that can make a person susceptible to COVID-19. I'll now get into the various cutting agents. One of the cutting agents in heroin, quinine. I'll start with a quick story on quinine. Back in the 1920s in New York City, there was a heroin epidemic. And at the same time, there was an outbreak of malaria amongst heroin users. And this is 1920. And the public health authorities at the time thought that the malaria among the heroin users was due to contaminated heroin. They didn't know what was in the heroin. They just thought that the heroin was contaminated and causing malaria. So the public health authorities at that time in 1920 recommended that the dealers cut their heroin with quinine, because quinine is an anti-malarial used to cure malaria. So the dealers cut the heroin with quinine, and as a result, the malaria problem amongst the heroin population went away. And unfortunately, it was thought that the malaria problem was done to contaminated heroin, which it wasn't. Actually, the malaria was transmitted because the heroin users were sharing needles. They were sharing injecting equipment. And so they were injecting contaminated heroin, the blood from the previous user. They were injecting the sharing the needle, injecting the heroin, and then they were basically injecting malaria system. It had nothing to do with contaminated heroin. It was due to shared injection equipment like we see with HIV/AIDS today. Then if we fast forward 60 years later to 1981, like in June 1981 is when it's the date when basically the HIV epidemic hit the United States. And at that time, we were not aware that one of the vehicles to transmit HIV/AIDS was shared injection equipment. And we did not know that at the time, as we did not learn the lesson 60 years early from 1920, that it wasn't contaminated heroin causing a health problem, but the shared injection equipment. Had we learned that lesson in 1920, we could have stayed ahead of the curve with HIV/AIDS in 1981 by taking preventive measures with the heroin using population, because we would have known that a sharing of injection equipment would have resulted in an HIV/AIDS. But unfortunately, we did not learn that lesson from the 1920s epidemic in New York, because it did not realize that shared injection equipment passed on an infectious disease. Okay, so quinine, basically, like I said, is a medication used to treat malaria and used to cut heroin. But quinine has been related to cardiovascular toxicity, damage to the heart system, and it also results in reduction of red blood cells, which is important because when you reduce red blood cells, as we discussed last week, there's less oxygen in the blood. Less oxygen in the blood leads to hypoxemia, which causes cardiac and pulmonary complications to the lung and to the heart, and that could put a person at risk for COVID-19. And as I discussed last week, there were many people in recovery from heroin that I've known over the years, and since 1990, at treatment conferences, they always told me that they felt that the long-range health problems they had after they used drugs in recovery, a lot was due to the cutting agents and not to the drugs. And at the time when they used heroin in the 60s and 70s, quinine was the main cutting agent, and they felt that cutting agent quinine had caused problems, but back then we didn't have research on that. Many of these people had to have heart valve replacement surgery, problems with the aorta, problems with their cardiovascular system, and they wound up being right, but we didn't learn until years later when research came out on the damage that quinine mixed with heroin can do with the cardiovascular system. As we discussed last week, levamisole, a main cutting agent in cocaine. Levamisole potentiates cocaine, makes it more powerful. Levamisole is also a veterinary dewormer, a veterinary product. And what happened with that in humans, levamisole, we discussed last week, depletes white blood cells, and that lowers the immunity in individuals and increase opportunistic infections. And so therefore, levamisole, a contaminated cocaine, will deplete white blood cells, and that makes the person susceptible to COVID-19 as the immune system is severely compromised. Phenacetin, we discussed the banned analgesic that was an aspirin, reduced pain and fever, was removed because it depleted red blood cells and caused kidney failure. Okay, by reduction of red blood cells, as we discussed, red blood cells are destroyed prematurely, affecting oxygen transfer. Less oxygen in the system leads to hypoxemia, that leads to cardiovascular and pulmonary damage. And also phenacetin, when combined with heroin, can cause respiratory depression and can compromise the respiratory system, putting a user at risk for COVID-19. Acetaminophen, known as Tylenol, is an over-the-counter pain relief medication. But if you use it in high doses, you have to be careful because you can get liver damage. However, when it's mixed with heroin, it can dramatically depress heart rate and breathing and lead to overdose. As discussed last week, this happened in 2019 in the Dallas, Texas area, when a bunch of adolescents, they were combining Mexican heroin with Tylenol and diphenhydramine. And we discussed last week, Tylenol is one thing if you use as a medication for pain and fever, as long as you don't overuse it. But if you combine Tylenol with heroin, you have a totally different project. A totally different product. The Tylenol has a synergistic effect with heroin that makes the heroin more stronger. It creates a double depressant effect, and it could lead to depress the heart rate, and basically it could depress breathing and lead to overdose. But when it basically compromises the respiratory system, if a person does an overdose from acetaminophen in heroin, we know we've seen it in the United States, it's cut into Afghanistan heroin. Basically, there has to be considerable amounts of acetaminophen in the heroin to cause an overdose death. But if you have limited amounts in there and you're using over time, you can do damage to your liver and you could compromise your respiratory system, making the user susceptible to COVID-19. There's other risk I want to get into with acetaminophen. This is because of some of the drug testing trips, the Diploma Plan, a part of the project we have that we took around the world to test different drugs to see the cutting agents, to determine the cutting agents. In Central America, we had found that the crack cocaine was cut with either acetaminophen or diphenhydramine. And so there's basically what I wanted to get into, the additional acetaminophen risk from this is that when you could just have one drug, one adulterant, cocaine, acetaminophen, and then you combine with that alcohol, because we had found out in Central America the crack cocaine users were also binge alcohol drinkers. They consumed vast quantities of alcohol while they're smoking crack cocaine. So if that cocaine is cut with acetaminophen, we know using too much acetaminophen can lead to liver damage. If you have acetaminophen in cocaine and you're drinking, when the person drinks alcohol with acetaminophen, there's a risk of kidney disease also. Acetaminophen can damage your liver. Alcohol with acetaminophen can damage your kidney also. And people using crack cocaine, a highly addictive form of crack, smoking 15 to 30 times a day and drinking vast amounts of alcohol with it, are going to also damage their kidney. In addition to the cocaine, we're talking about cocaine, acetaminophen, and alcohol. There is interaction between alcohol and cocaine called the cocoethylene risk. Cocoethylene is a byproduct of concurrent consumption of alcohol and cocaine. In most users, cocoethylene produces euphoria and has a longer duration of action than cocaine. But studies of consuming alcohol in combination with cocaine may be more cardiotoxic, that's damage to the heart system, than cocaine itself, and has a 25 times more chance of overdose. So just a simple combination of acetaminophen, cocaine, and alcohol can do damage to the liver, can do damage to the kidney, damage to the respiratory system, and can cause overdose. So that simple combination can be very lethal. And that's basically, we found that being prevalent among crack cocaine users in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Another adulterant, a cutting agent, found in heroin or cocaine is diphenhydramine, which is Benadryl, which we use for allergies. It's one thing to use a Benadryl tablet for an allergy, but if you crush these tablets up and mix it with heroin, like we saw in Texas in 2009, overdose deaths resulted from this, because when mixed with heroin, it can dramatically decrease heart rate and breathing and lead to overdose. It also causes irregular heartbeat. So diphenhydramine mixed with heroin will affect the respiratory system. It will affect the cardiovascular system, compromising that system, making a user basically more susceptible to infections such as COVID-19. And also, it's found out that combinations of cocaine and antihistamines like Benadryl have a synergistic effects or super additive reinforcement effects with regard to potency, meaning that diphenhydramine mixed with cocaine will make cocaine more powerful, just like the veterinary dewormer levamisole mixed with cocaine will make cocaine more powerful. That would result in more use, and that would result in more damage to both the cardiovascular and to the respiratory systems. Okay, diltiazem, which is medication belonging to a class of channel blockers and is commonly used to treat high blood pressure. However, diltiazem has a double depressant effect with heroin. We found this in 2016 in the Northeast United States and the New England states when alerts were put out throughout those states on overdoses due to just diltiazem and heroin, the double depressant effect that diltiazem will cause when combined with heroin. And as an adulterant, it can also cause severe cardiovascular reactions. It's damage to the heart system and toxic cardiac effects. So diltiazem and heroin will affect both the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system, putting users of this combination, at risk for COVID-19. Now, caffeine is a basically stimulant. We have that in soft drinks, in energy drinks, but caffeine used to excess can be dangerous. And caffeine has been used as a common mixture for heroin and for cocaine. Okay, the mixture of caffeine and cocaine enhances cocaine psychostimulant effects and reduces additive effects between the two drugs. And unfortunately, it potentiates the toxic effects of cocaine. Now, with heroin, caffeine can cause abnormal heart rhythm and respiratory distress that could lead to overdose. Okay, caffeine is also addictive, we have mentioned, and chronic use can lead to cardiotoxicity, that's damage to the heart, changes in heart rate, and cardiac injury. Now, caffeine mixed with cocaine will do damage to the cardiovascular system. Mixed with heroin, it causes damage to the respiratory system. So we have damage to both the cardiovascular and respiratory system, putting a user at risk for COVID-19. Xylazine is another veterinary product, but we find this in heroin. It's commonly used as an adulterant in heroin. It also has a synergistic effect with heroin, makes heroin more potent. It's only approved as an animal tranquilizer. Okay, and what we have found out that the most common side effect is respiratory depression. There have been reports of overdose of xylazine mixed with heroin in the United States and Pennsylvania. There have been overdoses of xylazine mixed with heroin in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, as we discussed last week. And xylazine mixed with heroin basically compromises the respiratory system. Another analgesic pain reliever, metamizole diprone. It's a pain reliever, fever reducer, spasm reliever. As we discussed last week, it's banned in the U.S. and about 1/3 of the countries worldwide. It's available over the counter in the other third. In the other third of the countries, you need a prescription to get. Heroin, special is again the depletion of white blood cells. Metamizole. Okay, metamizole will deplete white blood cells, and that results in a dangerously suppressed immune system that places the user at high risk for various infections due to severely lowered white blood cell count. And also, it's found out that metamizole also potentiates heroin, makes cocaine a little bit more powerful. So metamizole mixed with heroin will suppress the immune system and make the person, susceptible to various infections and diseases, including COVID-19. The same with aminopyrine, which is a banned analgesic and anti-inflammatory. Again, it was removed from aspirin because it depleted white blood cells, leading to increased susceptibility to infection, suppressed immune function, and the body's ability to fight off even minor infections. Now, this is an important point here because aminopyrine we find in a majority of the crack cocaine in South America, especially Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile. Okay, and people who smoke coca paste or crack cocaine contaminated with aminopyrine can experience overwhelming, rapidly developing, life-threatening infections. So aminopyrine with crack cocaine is very strong. It severely depletes white blood cells and puts the user at severe risk for various infections and diseases, including COVID-19. Like lidocaine is a common local use, but it's also used as a cocaine adulterant. It results in damage to the cardiovascular system. Additional side effects also include respiratory depression and hypertension. Respiratory and compromising to the respiratory system can leave people susceptible to COVID-19. Hypertension or high blood pressure, which lidocaine combined in cocaine or heroin can cause. Hypertension or high blood pressure is a high risk factor for COVID-19, and also damages to the cardiovascular system. Also, it could put you at high risk for COVID-19. Benzocaine is another local anesthetic, often used as a cocaine adulterant. Benzocaine, however, results in reduced oxygen levels in the blood when reduced with cocaine. And as we discussed previously, this leads to hypoxemia, which is less oxygen in the blood that can result in damage to the cardiovascular and to the pulmonary systems. That puts the person at risk for COVID-19. But what I want to discuss here is I guess a different type of drug, or that combination that we found in our Colombo Plan drug testing in both South Africa and Honduras in 2016 and 2017. What we found out that when crack cocaine was not available in South Africa and Honduras, the local drug dealers would substitute different cutting agents. Now, these aren't controlled drugs, but in South Africa, when crack cocaine wasn't available, the local drug dealer would combine benzocaine with phenacetin. Benzocaine, an anesthetic, and phenacetin, an analgesic and aspirin that's been banned. Well, combining two powders, benzocaine and phenacetin, the users thought that they were using crack cocaine. We only got anecdotal information. We interviewed a few people who were using this combined substance. All they could say was they thought they were using crack cocaine. But this would be a very dangerous combination. As we discussed, both benzocaine and phenacetin severely deplete red blood cells. That creates low oxygen levels in the blood that can lead to cardiovascular and pulmonary problems. That will also make you susceptible to COVID-19. But these cause serious health problems. And what we're doing now is, like I discussed last week, the Colombo Plan has a special project with a research institute in Mexico City called Sinvestav. And they're doing special studies for us on drug adulterant combinations to see what the effects of adulterants have with drugs on long-term health. They're also doing for us on benzocaine phenacetin combinations to find out why users seem to think this is a substitute for crack cocaine. Does this actually have effects similar to crack cocaine or to cocaine? And also to determine the long-term and near-term health effects. In Honduras, when crack cocaine is not available, the local dealer will substitute the veterinary dewormer levamisole with the anesthetic benzocaine and combine that. And we had interviewed a few users in Honduras and crack cocaine. But like I said, with the Research Institute in Mexico City, Colombo Plan, we're doing some special research studies now on what effect does benzocaine and levamisole actually have. Does it produce an effect similar to cocaine? But what we are concerned about is benzocaine depleting red blood cells, levamisole depleting white blood cells. That's a dangerous combination that could also compromise the immune system. Okay, another adulterant, hydroxine in heroin. Hydroxine is used to treat itching or allergies. Okay, it also may be used to treat short-term anxiety. It potentiates the side effect of cocaine and can cause irregular heartbeat. So it can cause damage to the cardiovascular system. Now, this is a combination that I want to talk about real quick. This levamisole phenacetin combination that I briefly alluded to last week, we're starting to see this combination in the United States more frequently. We're starting to see it in Latin America more frequently. We're starting to see it in South Africa. Well, anywhere where there's a cocaine, either cocaine hydrochloride or crack cocaine. Now, these samples that we're seeing, they're basically just three products: a drug, cocaine, and then two cutting agents, levamisole and phenacetin. These aren't like 15 combinations in an individual drug sample. These are only three. But this is a very toxic combination. And we're very concerned about what we're seeing here, simply because we know phenacetin reduces red blood cells, cutting off oxygen transfer, and that levamisole depletes white blood cells, making the person more immune to infections and diseases. But levamisole also does more, as we discussed last week. The human body metabolizes levamisole into an amphetamine called Amenorix. And what happens is, as the cocaine high wears down, levamisole metabolizes to Amenorix, an amphetamine, that continues the stimulant high in the user. So what this does is levamisole mixed with cocaine, as we discussed last week, makes the cocaine high more powerful, but it also extends the cocaine high, makes it twice as long. But it also does more damage. Levamisole we said the human body converts it to an amphetamine, Amenorexx. Amenorexx is an amphetamine, but Amenorexx basically has found to be responsible for idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. In short, pulmonary hypertension is high blood pressure in the arteries and blood vessels of the lungs and heart. And what that means is the arteries and blood vessels in the heart and the lung, they become blocked or narrowed, making it hard for the heart to pump blood through them. To use an example, in the upper right-hand corner over here is a normal pulmonary vessel, okay, where to the lung, which red blood cells would go through. At the bottom right is pulmonary hypertension, the constricted blood vessel or the constricted artery, which makes it harder to pump blood through. So what this does is phenacetin destroys red blood cells. So there's less oxygen-bearing red blood cells in the body. But then what happens is those remaining red blood cells, they are hindered from getting oxygen to the brain because of the pulmonary hypertension caused by the levamisole converting to Amenorexx. That constricts the arteries and blood vessels in the lung and the heart, making it that much harder for those surviving red blood cells to carry oxygen to the brain. This combination will result in severe hypoxemia, cutting off oxygen, red-bearing blood cells that can carry oxygen to the brain, basically compromising both the pulmonary and cardiovascular systems. In addition, we know that Amenorexx we call pulmonary hypertension. Well, there was overdose. It was a 5-year epidemic of idiopathic pulmonary hypertension in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany and Europe in 1969 to 1972, blocked or narrowed due to the Amenorexx, either Amenorexx itself used as an amphetamine or Amenorexx when combined with cocaine. Basically, what that does, we said it had narrowed the blood vessels and the arteries in the heart and the lung. So basically, combining phenacetin and levamisole in cocaine causes various health problems. To summarize, depleted red blood cells, depleted white blood cells. Depleted white blood cells compromise the immune system. The levamisole in the cocaine metabolizes to an amphetamine, Amenorexx, that causes pulmonary hypertension, constricting the blood vessels in the arteries in the heart and the lung, making it harder to carry red blood cells to the brain, resulting in hypoxemia. So you get damage to the pulmonary and the cardiovascular systems due to the phenacetin, damage to the immune system due to levamisole, and the depletion of white blood cells. So it's a fairly toxic combination here that can lead to both near and short-term chronic health problems and to COVID-19 by compromising various systems in the body. Okay. Also, there's another aspect that puts users at high risk for COVID-19, and that is the environment in which drugs are used. Okay, many drug users reside in geographical areas characterized by social deprivation, high population densities, poor quality housing, homelessness, reduced access to healthcare. This alone puts them at high risk for COVID-19. But in certain areas of the world where we have open drug markets, this is very obvious. Like, for instance, in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, where we've done a lot of research on our Colombo Plan project in Cracolândia, an open-air crack market. There's thousands of people using crack cocaine. We know that crack cocaine is cut with phenacetin, levamisole, aminopyrine. That puts users at high risk for COVID-19 and various infectious diseases. Also the environment in which it is used, there is no social distancing. So this will increase the spread of COVID-19. There's also the sharing of drug paraphernalia. There's a sharing of crack pipes that people use and share with each other that will spread COVID-19. So we know that crack cocaine puts the user at severe risk for COVID-19 due to its effects on the pulmonary and respiratory system. Also, the environment in which crack cocaine is used, no social distancing, shared drug paraphernalia, puts crack users at especially severe risk for COVID-19. The same in South Africa, in Durban, an area called Wunga Park. Wunga or the term niope, that is the term for a heroin marijuana combination that is smoked. It's a discussed last week that contains numerous adulterants or cutting agents that have various toxic effects on the user. When using that in an open air drug market like we see in Wunga Park here, again, the combination of heroin, marijuana with the various cutting agents will put a user at risk for severe health effects, for overdose, for COVID-19. In addition, the open air environment with no social distancing and shared drug paraphernalia as sharing the same joint that is smoked with both marijuana and heroin in it, that will result in increase of COVID-19. In the US, United States, we also have open air drug markets. This one is in Philadelphia, outside the Conrail train yards, where people will inject heroin or smoke cocaine or snort cocaine. Again, an open air environment, no social distancing, using shared drug paraphernalia, whether it's shared crack pipes or shared injection equipment, and also using drugs, heroin and cocaine combinations that have various adulterants that lead to severe chronic health problems, in addition to making a person more susceptible to things like coronaviruses. Okay, what I wanted to get into next is we've had questions on what the Colombo plan is doing. What products do we have to help get information out on these problems of adulterants and drugs and the near and long-term health problems that they cause. As part of the project, we've developed what we call flow diagrams for the diagnosis and treatment of common adulterants that we see in heroin and cocaine. These are mainly used by public health or medical personnel that they can tell if a substance user has been exposed to a cutting agent such as diltiazem or levamisole here, how to diagnose it and how to treat it. To date, we have completed 5 of these flow diagrams. We've done it for phenacetin, levamisole, aminopyrazam, and metamizole. We're in the process now. We've just completed the rough draft for 10 more adulterants, flow diagrams for 10 more adulterants, including xylazine, tramadol, alprazolam, diphenhydramine, quinine, gabapentin, lidocaine, procaine, benzocaine, quintipiane, and theophylline. So we have a rough draft of those. We'll have them soon, and we've provided these to public health authorities in various countries where we have tested adulterants. We're going to produce some more of these, and we'll have them available for you. We'll be distributing them more to public health authorities in countries worldwide where these adulterants show up. Like I said, these are mostly used for medical or public health personnel, but for the common layperson, for the counselors and drug treatment programs, people in regular public health clinics, what we're doing, we're developing adulterant public health alerts. These are short 2 to 3 page alerts that we will basically are designed for public health authorities, clinicians, treatment centers, treatment center counselors, medical examiners, coroners, forensic drug testing labs. Basically, they're devised for the community at large. They'll be put in layman's terms, easy to understand. It'll have common information on what the adulterant is, what the public health effects are, and what, say, treatment providers can use with their client population to address the adulterant problem that they may have. This is a sample of a rough draft. This is one for levamisole that we're doing under our Colombo Plan project that we're going to basically distribute this within the next month worldwide. We're doing this on levamisole first because the most prevalent cutting agent that we see worldwide is levamisole. We see this in many countries. Utilizing this public health alert now, it'll be 2 or 3 pages long, and to this alert we're going to include the medical flow diagram we have here for levamisole. Let me get that on here. We'll include the flow diagram for levamisole for the medical professionals, but this can be used by treatment centers, providers, by clinicians, medical examiners, by public health labs, which we have talked about. We'll be getting those out, which will also be to the ISUP membership. It'll be available. We'll get this out to public health authorities worldwide. What we've also done is we have part of the project, we have developed urine test kits. To tell you real quickly what happens here is we have urine tests for common controlled drugs of youth: heroin, cocaine, ketamine, cannabis, fentanyl. There are no urine test kits for adulterants, but as part of the Colombo Plan project, we have a project that is developing instant urine test kits for adulterants, and so far we have developed the first urine test kits for phenacetin and aminopyrine. We're on the third year of developing one for levamisole. If you review the literature, you'll find out that many researchers have tried to develop an instant urine test kit for levamisole, but third year of it, we're very close. We expect to have a working test kit for levamisole within the next few months. And at that time, we'll put together a test kit for phenacetin, aminopyrine, and levamisole, the major common cutting agents that we see worldwide, and we'll have those available for distribution to public health authorities. And so, but for distribution in the US, we'll have to get FDA approval, which we'll be working on once we get the levamisole test strip perfected. And so we'll have the first inch for levamisole distributed. We're also going to do a guidebook for adulterants. This is a guidebook on street drugs. It's about 100 pages long, done by an NGO. It's a very efficient guidebook because it's done in layman's term. There's a lot of bullets. There's a lot of helpful information in there. There's photos, of what the drug looks like. We're going to do a similar thing for adulterants. We're going to do about the 70, 80-page guidebook on adulterants, all the major adulterants that we discussed here and that may come up in the future. And we're going to use this guidebook, and we're going to use this as a supplement to the Universal Treatment Curriculum course on pharmacology. So we'll have this supplement as part of the UTC course on pharmacology. We're also going to distribute this supplement worldwide to public health authorities, law enforcement authorities, treatment centers, the ISUP membership. So we'll be printing thousands of copies of this, and we expect to have this done in about a few months. We're just starting to draft it and to basically write this book right now. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to stop. Joanna had emailed me some questions. Okay, so one question is, can you tell me about testing labs in countries that use them effectively? To let you know real quick, the drug testing labs in countries, most of the law enforcement testing labs, their main job is to detect a control drug, heroin, cocaine, so they can proceed with prosecution. If they have time, they get to look at the other cutting agents that are in a drug, but that's not their main job. Fortunately, a lot of law enforcement labs worldwide have been also doing an extended analysis of drugs, not just looking for control drugs, say heroin, but to look for what other cutting agents are in there. And they have been getting information on that out to public health authority. Though that is not their job, their primary job is law enforcement to confirm a control drug for prosecution. There are many law enforcement drug testing labs that are doing a tremendous service for public health by also letting public health authorities know what else is included in the heroin or the cocaine. I discussed last week there's these early warning alert systems that have been set up in Argentina, in Chile, in Colombia, and also in the state of Kentucky in the United States, where the drug testing labs get together periodically with the public health authorities and let them know what new drugs they're seeing, what new drug combinations, what new psychoactive substances they're seeing, what new adulterants they're seeing, and getting this information out to the public health authority. Okay. Another one says, should we be looking out for some of the health consequences you have outlined in our clients? Yes, I would basically, if your client has a severe substance use disorder and they're using specifically cocaine, you may assume that cocaine has been cut. Like 79% we're seeing now, our latest figure of world cocaine is cut with levamisole. If you have a client that has used cocaine, you might just in treatment, you may want to do a white blood cell count, because because the levamisole in that cocaine will deplete white blood cells. The aminopyrin will deplete white blood cells. If there's metamizole in heroin, it will deplete white blood cells. Also with cocaine, if it has been cut with phenacetin, especially crack cocaine users, you may want to be looking into red blood cell counts as they first come into treatment, because the phenacetin will deplete red blood cells. If they've smoked a lot of crack cocaine, if you assume it has phenacetin, you may want to do kidney function tests, CAT scans of the kidney ultrasounds, because phenacetin does serious damage to the kidney, does a kidney damage. For heroin users, if you suspect that quinine, an anti-malarial drug, has been in the heroin, you may want to do a cardiovascular test, because what to do is you'll receive a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. I've listed about 20 adulterants and the various effects it has, whether it's on red blood cells, white blood cells, heart, kidney, and liver. And this will give you an idea of maybe what type of health test you want to use on a person with a severe substance use disorder that first comes into treatment. We're reading another question here. Okay, one question was in Mexico City on crack cocaine. They were asking about the effects that street crack cocaine might have. Okay, like we discussed before, the effects that street cocaine, you want to see if that is cut with levamisole, phenacetin, or aminopyrin. The levamisole and aminopyrin are going to severely deplete white blood cells, open the user up to various infections and diseases. The phenacetin will do kidney damage, and it's also going to deplete the red blood cells, affects the oxygen level in the body of the user. Okay, like I said, there's a research institute in Mexico City, Sinvistav, where we are doing various studies on rodents of drug adulterant combinations and various adulterant combinations I discussed before, like benzocaine and phenacetin. Another one. Okay, if I want to bring this knowledge up to the infrastructure in my country, where do you recommend starting? Police, policymakers, addiction centers? I would take it first to your public health authorities, to the local, state, federal, and national level public health authorities. You can use some of the information that we'll be putting out in our flow diagrams that we have, or the health alerts that we're going to put out for the various adulterants, starting with levamisole. You could then, if you have access to the local police or the local drug testing labs, you can provide this information to them. You could ask them if they have the time when they're analyzing heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, illicit drugs, if they could also do an extended analysis to see what other adulterants or cutting agents are in there. What we have found out is when they have the time, law enforcement agencies are very willing to help out the public health authorities to do the extra analysis to see what other cutting agents are in there. The other one asked, other national alert or regional alert systems like I discussed. We know we have seen the alert systems in Chile, in Argentina, in Colombia. I've seen them in the state of Kentucky where those have done. I know the OAS CCAD, the Organization of American States, their component that handles addictions and drugs, the CCAD, they've developed early warning alert systems in many countries throughout the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, and South America. Okay, and because basically that's most of the questions that I have that I got over here that have come in. So let me make sure I got them all. You were looking out for some health cons on that. Yeah, are adulterants ever addictive in their own right? Certain adulterants, if you use too much caffeine, that could be addictive and can be damaging. A lot of these adulterants, which we have discussed, haven't really been seen to be addictive. They've been found to basically potentiate or make the product, the heroin or cocaine, more addictive, more powerful. About of addiction, the amphetamine, Amenarex, where levamisole metabolizes to Amenarex. Amenarex is an amphetamine that could be used either alone by itself, and that's addictive too. But basically, a lot of these other ones, these veterinary products, have not found to be addictive, but are found to have a very toxic interactive effect with the drug itself, either potentiating, making that drug very strong, or contaminating that drug, making that drug very toxic. Okay, we're almost at the hour mark, Joanne. I'm gonna just check. Yeah, let's see if I got any other questions. Okay, yeah, Joanne, I guess that's it. I have no other questions. We finished there. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation in this, and to let you know that these PowerPoints will be available to ISUP, so you can have these. Also, the medical flow diagrams we're developing, the public health alerts on the various adulterants, and the guidebook, that'll be available to you too. We have those. We'll get those available to you through ISUP and through the public health authorities in your country. Okay, thank you, Joanne. Is there anything else, Joanne?
Thank you very much, Thom. Hi, Thom. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to those of you who sent us the questions. Unfortunately, we really didn't have time because we only have 5 minutes left. For those questions that we weren't able to answer, we will put them on the ISUP network, so we can, as a group, continue discussing the topic on our network. Again, thank you very much, Thom, for holding this fascinating webinar series. It was really very well received. We've received, like, I'm just looking at the comments coming in and the positive feedback. Many congratulations, wishes. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and the wealth of information on this topic with us and with our members. As you mentioned, the PowerPoint presentation will be up there. We'll share that with our members. For those of you who want to re-watch the webinar or want to share it with your colleagues, we'll also put that on our website and share it with everyone. We'll send out a follow-up email at the beginning of next week. And yeah, for now, we'll be taking a short break from our webinars, but please do check our website and our newsletter, social media channels, where we will be announcing upcoming webinars. Again, thank you very much, Thom, and thank you all, and stay safe.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.